You're listening to The Sacred Sofa, a podcast that explores all things theology and therapy. My name is Grace Brown. I'm a registered psychotherapist, certified Canadian counselor, and owner of Journey with Grace Counseling Services.
And I'm Brad Watson, pastor of Nexus Church and author of the book, A Path Called Compelling. Welcome to The Sacred Sofa.
Welcome back, Sacred Sofa listeners, to our next episode. And for this season of our podcast, we have been exploring all things related to the good and flourishing life. Now, we're doing that by looking at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount while bringing theology into conversation with therapy and psychology. And so today, we're going to be talking about our words, how we use them, the impact they have, and what they say about us. So welcome back, Brad. Why don't you take us into this episode on words?
Yeah, thank you, Grace. And it's always a delight to be with you here doing this podcast. And yeah, words doesn't seem like something we would normally explore, I guess, but it seems like an odd turn in the good life exploration. I was thinking if I had a top 10 list of things that contribute to the flourishing life, I'm not sure it would make the top 10 for me, but it's all of a sudden it's just there in Jesus' sermon. So I'll give you a little truncated version of what Jesus says in his Sermon on the Mount. He says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all. All you need to do is simply say yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." Now, Grace, I wouldn't have placed this again high on my good life list, but the moment I hear these words from Jesus, I immediately start feeling a little guilty. This feels directed at me. I have a very hard time just giving simple yes or no answers to anything. And I think this brings me to my first question for you. Why do some of us, people like me, struggle to mean what we say and then follow through with our words?
Well, I agree with you. Jesus has come in hot, as told by the gospel or the prophet Matthew, disciple Matthew, oof, we don't often connect, simple yes or no or swearing an oath to the evil one. Like that sounds very Lord of the Ring-esque,
For sure.
But, why do a lot of times folks struggle? I believe there are a few reasons some folks struggle with saying what they mean and meaning what they say, and also having trouble to follow through. And I'll talk about a couple, although I think there's more and you'll add to that. But reason number one is I think people don't actually know what they think and feel, which may sound odd, but I've worked with many clients who aren't given permission to be authentic and truthful. And what I mean by that is because they've often experienced negative consequences or responses when they try to speak the truth or speak from their place of what they're feeling or what they think. And so those negative consequences or responses have basically taught them hold back. And then over time, they just start to defer to other people's thoughts and opinions. And so they can struggle to identify what they actually feel, think, or what is true for them. And so continue to hold back. I think the other reason that happens is fear. Many folks find it a challenge to say what they mean due to the fear of the response. And so this can then lead to passive forms of communication, such as sugarcoating things or being so indirect. They just aren't at the risk of offending someone. I got a couple more reasons I'll share. Another reason I think is we don't necessarily want to think about or accept that it is that some people don't actually value honesty.
Oh, interesting.
Takes me that old classic line, "You can't handle the truth."
Yeah.
We don't want to think that people don't actually want to hear the truth. And so we just avoid it. And then lastly, fear is also a factor for some folks in not following through because it's a fairly common fear, the fear of failure, which then causes a type of decision paralysis or even extreme procrastination. Most of these are rooted in fear. So those are just a few that I think, and I think there are more because people are unique, right? So, but Brad, you mentioned that's something you struggle with. Would you be okay and willing to share with us why it's a struggle for you at times?
Yeah, and already some of your points resonated. But I think of your first point there, not knowing what
Hmm.
they think and feel. For me, that's not so much the case, but I know we've done a little bit of conversation here about the Enneagram, and my wife Kristen is a type 9. The Enneagram's a personality tool, but they often merge with other people. So it's hard for them to sometimes know what they think and feel. And it's very easy to, where do you want to go for dinner? Well, wherever you want to go for dinner, right?
Hmm.
It's hard for them to actually get down and decide, you know what, I want sushi tonight. So those already make sense to me. And I think a lot of them cover some of the things that I would say. The first would be social pressure,
Hmm.
right? I know that's a big thing for me, is fearing, oh, if I don't maybe really want to do this, but there feels like there's social pressure. I don't want to disappoint people. And a
Hmm.
lot of that
Hmm.
probably goes back to boundaries, which we've talked a lot about here.
Hmm.
And I find it easy, I think, to give an insincere answer in the moment, which is really just probably, like you said, based in fear, a fear of a more difficult conversation.
Hmm.
So, those are some things for me too. I would also say that sometimes, you don't know what you want in the future. I don't know if you've ever arranged like a lunch date with somebody. Hey, next Tuesday we're going for lunch. Where do you want to meet? Well, I don't know what I want to eat on Tuesday. Like I might want chicken now, but maybe I don't know, tacos next Tuesday. So, there's a number of things that play for me. Fear of commitment. Sometimes it can feel trapped to say or commit to something in the future. So,
Hmm.
those are a
Hmm.
few of the things I think at play for me. But like you said, I think fear is probably underneath a lot of these. And as I'm thinking through this here, Grace, I'm realizing that when we live a life where our words don't really mean much,
Hmm.
it comes again back to that idea we've been exploring this whole season, that we're living a fragmented life. It divides us because I
Hmm.
think what it does is it locks our actions to our current mood or feelings. So when we said yes to something, but then back out or don't follow through, it means we're chained to our present self and circumstances. I don't know if that
Hmm.
makes sense to you, but it gives our sort of current feelings maybe too much leverage. And
Hmm.
that's not good for ourselves, but also has an impact, I think, on others. So this is something I struggle with. But Grace, from your experience, could you tell us about the impact people like me can have on others and ourselves when our words maybe mean little or carry less weight than maybe they should?
Mm-hmm, hmm. And the struggle is real, not just for you, but for others. And what can make it more difficult is what happens then when a person is not able for their yes to be yes and their no to be no. What happens is it starts to create a pattern in the person who avoids, because then the more you avoid, the more anxious you actually get. And then the pattern of not being assertive starts to happen. And
Hmm.
this actually builds mistrust in a
Ah,
relationship. I'm sure you probably recall, having the same thing happen to you. And it's like, after a while, you're like, well, I don't know if I'm actually going to see that person. You actually just begin to doubt that it's even important anymore. And
right.
so it starts to build mistrust in the relationship. And at the core, not meaning what you say is actually dishonesty.
Hmm.
And this,
Yes.
right? Honesty is what builds strong relationships, not passivity and avoidance. If people can't trust others with the small things, they're less likely to trust with the big things. Here's another interesting thing to make note of. Another hazard is, what I've learned is there's ongoing research about actual changes in the brain that happen that make lying easier and easier. So we're not
Really?
just,
Wow.
yes. So we're not just talking about an emotional impact. We're actually talking about a biological change that can happen over time in our brain that just makes being dishonest, deferring to others easier and easier and easier. So we got to really,
Wow.
really be careful.
Yeah, so are you suggesting it like creates like neural pathways that then become easier to follow and harder to break as
Yes.
well?
Hmm. Hmm.
Wow. Well,
And
it's
the
an
and the
important. Yes.
dopamine hit that you get from lying and getting away with it is like, ooh, And then you hit it again and you hit it again.
Oh.
And it actually starts to change the way our brain functions. So there's more to be cautious about in terms of how do I be honest and authentic.
Well, and you start to realize when you get into things like that, that while this seems out of left field from Jesus, right? Like, oh, we're talking about words. Okay, there's some serious things happening here. And so it seems important if you want to find the good life Jesus is saying, make sure there's weight behind your words. And this focus on words goes beyond Jesus actually, because for him it's just this little snippet here. So we have this brief word from Jesus about the mouth and the tongue, but the rest of the New Testament writers kind of pick up on this and expand on Jesus' teachings. So if you consider James, he's got a rather lengthy treatment on the perils of our words and our tongues. I'll give you a snippet from him.
Mm-hmm.
It says, all kind of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by humankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue, we praise our Lord and Father, and with it, we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. That's quite the indictment there. And that's just a section of his more lengthy treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Humans, he goes on to say, right, have tamed wolves, lions, tigers, whales. I mean, we've tamed it all, but when you think about it, it's interesting that no human, according to James anyway, has been able to tame the tongue, and that's dangerous because the human tongue is full of poison. It can be very hurtful. And so I think what the New Testament is getting at is that human words have a way of revealing what's in our hearts, and our tongues, our words can be like fire. If you tame it, it can give other people warmth and energy and life. Out of control, though, it's like a forest fire, right? It's a force to be reckoned with and can destroy. And this is what is alarming to James. Despite all that we've tamed, we just can't figure out how to tame the tongue. One word of criticism, name calling, things like sarcasm, even cloaked behind comedy,
Yes.
gossip is another dangerous one, even just the tone of the words we use. So that's sort of what he's getting at here. And what is worse is what, again, he brings up this fragmentation idea. And that's what I find most interesting. With the same tongue, we praise God and we curse other human beings. And so, again, it's about a fragmentation. And so while the tongue can never be tamed, as James says, doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right, Grace? So,
Right, right.
if the goal of the flourishing life is to be undivided and whole, it's worth trying to bring our words into congruency with what we profess to believe and care about. And so,
Yes.
what I thought maybe we could do here, Grace, for the remainder of the episode is exchange ideas and strategies for taming the tongue, so to speak, or thinking more wisely about it, how we use our words. So, I don't know about our timing here, but maybe each of us could share three practical pieces of advice, sorry, about how we're more thoughtful, intentional about our words. Now, I've got a list of three. I think you do as well. So maybe I'll hand it over to you and maybe we'll just go back and forth.
Okay, thanks, Brad. And to your earlier points, Jesus is not playing around, right? Even though there's the compassion and understanding about who we are as humans, there's such a strong word of caution echoed by the New Testament writers and in the Gospels about how important this is to practice taming. He talked about taming lions, animals, and things like that. Back in the old days when, circus and zoos were popping, lion taming. You don't just show up one day and start taming a lion.
Yeah, right.
I suspect there's a very lengthy process in getting to the point where you can smack, the whip, and then the lion does whatever. Right. And so, yes, the goal is to keep practicing. It's not about perfection, but it's practicing being on that journey. So one place I would suggest that we all start is do a self-check. Jesus and James don't hold their tongue when it comes to cautioning us about taming ours. And my first word of advice goes back to mindfulness, taking the time to pay attention to how we're doing so we don't react and say things that are hurtful. I've talked in the past about Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence, and he also talks about internal conflict unresolved leads to external conflict. So I got to do a
Hmm.
self check. What's going on with me? Am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired, excited? You know, and then start there.
That's a great. I think that's so important, and the root of a lot of the things we talk about on here, right, Grace? You know, the idea of being mindful
Mm-hmm.
and starting there, because a lot of times it's not something we think much about. We just kind of spew out, don't think a whole lot
Mm-hmm.
about how we approach our words, and that leads to my first one, which would be simply to talk less and listen more.
I
And
like it.
I got this lesson actually through COVID, Grace. I have a Thursday night poker group that I belong to. And, you know, during COVID, everyone shut in and we were looking for ways to play online where we could see each other. One of the programs we discovered was this thing called Jitsu. It's basically like a different form of Zoom or whatever. But one of the fascinating things about it, Grace, is it showed in a corner how much everyone had been talking. So if I, yeah, yes, it was remarkable and very disconcerting. So if I told a long, elaborate story, it's like Brad talked for 20 minutes, everyone else has had 2 minutes of talking.
Oh,
And it
wow.
was fascinating how that just changed the dynamic when people were mindful, you could say, of
Mm-hmm.
how much they had been talking. Suddenly it was a reminder, oh, I've used up my quotient, maybe time to listen to others here.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think so often this really ties in with your mindfulness thing. We can talk and really not understand maybe how much oxygen we're sucking up in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some wisdom in just going, you know what, for now, I just need to listen more. And
Mm-hmm.
so that would be perhaps a little tidbit from me, my first one.
Love it. Love it. It's so incredible how much talking we actually do. Even folks who would identify as introverts, with given the
Hmm.
right circumstance, we do a lot of talking, which is kind of incredible when we think about we have two ears and only one mouth,
Yeah, right, right.
right? Unless you're an auctioneer, we can hear and listen more than we can talk. But most of us try to challenge that idea. And
Oh.
so it makes sense because talking is in a power position. So it takes awareness and humility to release the power and give others an opportunity to make their needs, thoughts, opinions known. Love it.
Hmm.
Talk less,
Yeah.
listen more.
Hmm.
My second point goes to practicing assertive communication. So there are three main communication styles: aggressive, passive, and assertive. We know what aggressive is, right? Bullying, demanding, taking more than your share. Passive is that soft sell, that indirect. It's confusing. It doesn't really land anywhere specifically. The goal is assertive communication, which is knowing what you want and being clear and direct about it. This is
Hmm.
an example I often use because I love me some ice cream. So,
Hmm.
assertive communication would be, I want to go to Dairy Queen and get a snack size cherry chocolate blizzard. Okay. Right.
Yep.
And I can be further assertive in my communication by say, hey, partner, Billy Joe, can you take me? Let's go together. That's very
Hmm.
clear. What's passive sounds like, sure would be nice to have ice cream. When, how, like there's nowhere
Right.
to land that. Right. And so the
Yeah.
goal is to have assertive communication. That doesn't mean it has to be aggressive, knowing what you want, feeling and thinking, and then saying it clearly. We're always responsible for how we communicate, being clear, being respectful. We are not responsible for how others respond.
Hmm. That's so good. And you know, you've been helpful the last few episodes with me, Grace, when assertiveness came up when thinking about anger. And I really
Mm,
appreciated that as well. And here again, just a reminder, you can be assertive without being aggressive. And I think for some of us, clearly stating what we want. Hey, would you like to come with me right now to Dairy Queen and get this specific thing? I think for some of us, maybe that
mm,
feels borderline aggressive. And yet I think it's so helpful to,
mm-hmm,
you know, in so many relationships, you know, it's like just communicate clearly with me what you want. And then you can go from there, right? Like, now's not a good time. I don't feel like ice cream. Maybe you can go on your own, whatever it is. But if we're left
Mm-hmm.
guessing, that's good. And I've really loved all you've had to say about assertiveness versus aggressiveness. And I think that's just really helpful. I know my second one would be, this is a big challenge for me, but it's okay for me to not have an opinion on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to have the last word. Now, I kind of know I snuck into there, Grace. That was slippery of me.
You used and there's a
I used
connecting word
and
there.
there, but just how complex this world is, and it strikes me that a lot of time in social conversation, whatever an issue comes up, we want to talk, we want to express some sort of opinion on it, and sometimes I just think that's not appropriate, and we can get ourselves in trouble if we haven't thought through something.
Hmm.
Now, for me, sometimes I learn by dialoguing with people, so I need to be able
Mm-hmm.
to throw out half-baked ideas for other
Mm-hmm.
people to push back on. But I just think a lot of times we assume anytime a conversation comes up, I need to have an opinion.
Hmm.
And for those of us who are maybe a bit more aggressive than assertive there, that
Mm-hmm.
need to
Mm-hmm.
have the final word. And this idea came from Dallas Willard, who, there's a great little story from him about how a teacher, right in the middle of class, so the class wasn't even done, challenged him on an idea. And Dallas Willard simply said, this is a great time to end the class. And they ended the class there, halfway done. And other
Mm-hmm.
students came up to him after and said, "Oh, why did you end the class early? And you could have totally put that student in his place, blah, blah, blah." And
Mm-hmm.
Dallas
Mm-hmm.
Willard's response was, "I'm just trying to practice the discipline of not having the last word all the time." And for people in power, like a professor, pastor,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, that can be easy to take that last word. So yeah, I just
Mm-hmm.
think those are two things to think about, be mindful about.
I like that. I like that. And I interpreted this statement, it's okay not to have an opinion, in two ways. The first way it makes me think about it is it's okay to say, I don't know. So it's
Mm,
okay that you don't actually have an opinion on the thing, right?
right.
Because sometimes we feel pressured to, respond or know something about the thing. And it takes courage and humility to say is, I don't actually know. And that's
Yeah,
okay.
right.
That's okay. And it's also okay to have an opinion and then with wisdom and an invitation, share it or not share it, like Dallas Willard,
Mm,
without an invitation.
mm,
Wisdom is not only about knowing what to say, but when to say it. Okay. And I also appreciate the last part about not needing to have the last word. Another aspect is of communication is humility in not having that last word. In healthy dialogue is not about winning versus losing. And
mm,
when you want to always have the last word, this moves more into that category of wanting to be the winner and that someone has to be the loser.
mm,
Which leads me to my third point. Practice the art of a true apology.
mm.
Listen, we are all human and we're going to make mistakes sometimes, even despite our best efforts. But we can all practice the humility of offering a genuine apology when you've become aware you've offended someone.
Hmm. Grace, just quickly on that, is there certain things we should avoid in apologies? You talk about a true, authentic apology. Like, is something like, the first thing that comes to mind, for instance, is, "Hey, Grace, I'm so sorry that I did that. It was just I was so tired."
Mm.
Where you can put sort of a thing on top, an excuse on the side there. Like, what makes for a really good, heartfelt apology?
Mhm. I'll just piggyback off of your example. You're being clear and direct in an
Hmm.
apology. Assertive communication is also important, and clarity is important. In
Hmm.
a genuine apology, it's not vague language. So, what you said was, I'm sorry I did that.
Hmm.
Well, what is that?
Right.
So, we're trying not to do an apology. We're actually trying to skirt away from the actual issue. In
Hmm.
a genuine apology, you're going to be specific in your words. I am sorry I raised my voice.
Right.
Right. And in a genuine apology, it also includes a bit of remorse or locking into the emotion. And
Hmm.
so, I'm sorry I raised my voice. That must have hurt your feelings, or that must have made you feel disrespected. So, I'm connecting my behavior to the
Okay.
offense of the other
Hmm.
party. And then where we go next. I'm
Hmm.
sorry I raised my voice. That must have made you feel hurt and disrespected. I'll do my very best not to do that again. So now
Hmm.
we're talking about intention to change. And none of
Right.
that includes I was tired, I was da da da. Like as soon as we start adding things, it just
Hmm.
dilutes the actual
Right.
apology happening. Maybe
Right.
there's context, but if you're trying to
Sure.
apologize, give the context prior and then go
Right.
into where. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was
And
even
that
thinking
takes
it,
practice.
yeah, yeah. If there is context, it might be, hey, sorry I yelled at you, Grace. I was very tired. Listen, in the future, when I'm tired, I will do my best to not, whatever it might be,
Yes.
right? So not letting the context be an excuse, but how we're going to
Mm-hmm.
change ourselves in a certain situation going forward. That's really
Yes.
helpful because I don't think a lot of us, like, where do you get taught this, right? Like you don't.
Probably in therapy.
Probably in therapy. There you go. What makes for a good apology. And that sort of shifts to what I was thinking for my last point as well. It can be one thing to talk about what we shouldn't do with our words and
Mm.
tongues. It's
Mm-hmm.
another thing to talk about what we should do. And
Yes.
doing an apology is a great one. So, not saying bad stuff is certainly part of the equation, but it's also about saying the good stuff, the healing stuff. And I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the most important practices in all of scripture is the practice of offering blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to go to Jesus' baptism with this, where God offers blessing on Jesus. You are my son in whom I am well pleased. There's a noticing there. So I've noticed something about you. And then there's a delight, a pleasure in it. Like you make
Mm-hmm.
me pleased, you bring me delight. And I think so often we can miss doing these things. It's a shame to me how often the nice things we say to people are reserved for funerals and weddings, right? Like we just don't
Mm-hmm.
offer it as much. And so I would encourage us as well, tame the tongue, but also unleash it a little more on the nice stuff and offering blessing and encouragement to people.
That is so beautiful, Brad, and very, very true.
Hmm.
The other day, I saw a sign. I was in Waterloo, and I believe it was one of those signs, stuck in the yard at a church. And
Yeah.
the sign said, "Be kinder."
Hmm.
And I remember a time in the past, a similar sign was there, and it said, "Be kind."
Huh.
And what came up for me was some mixed emotions when I saw that sign. First, a sadness that "be kind" didn't seem to be enough for our world right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then that sadness was then quickly followed by a feeling of hopefulness because there's still others out there working to be a light in the time of darkness of our world. And
Hmm.
so it was an encouragement to be kinder. We're not getting the kind just yet, but
Yes.
keep pushing, keep pushing.
Right.
So, to close off our episode, Brad, would you mind ending our time together with a blessing?
Yes, absolutely. I will do this. I sent this, Grace, you and I were talking about blessing. It was your idea in a part of the discussion group that we were in to maybe send a blessing to someone. And so I sent a little blessing, almost a little prayer blessing to one or two friends. So I'll offer it to our
Wonderful.
listeners as well as we close. It goes this way. Friends, may you find energy, vitality, and gratitude today. May this day be free from anything that would hurt or harm you and anything that would make you afraid, anxious, or angry. May you experience God's peace and presence in tangible ways today. And may God's Spirit be at work within you today, giving you more love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Amen. See you next time,
Amen.
Grace. See you next
Amen.
time.
See you next time.